Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone in between. This is Emily, and this year for Halloween, I'm going to attempt to make a spooky door wreath. Now, the goal is that I will be making a Nightmare Before Christmas themed wreath, but we'll see what supplies we have. So I am off to the dollar store.
Alright, so of course, I first started out in the florals. They had this huge, massive setup for all these Halloween decorations. It was pretty amazing. So I started out by picking my wreath frame. I went with this silver one, this circle one. It looked about the size I wanted. I also found this garden dish that I was going to use to make my Jack Skellington face, so I'm glad I found that. I had a purple feeling in my head, and they had these really pretty mesh wraps, so I grabbed 2 of those. Additionally, they had these pumpkins in the floral section that were black and white, perfect Jack Skellington-y pumpkins. And then, of course, they had flowers, but they had Halloween-themed roses. So I got these purple ones and black ones with spiders and eyeballs. And then, of course, I grabbed one of these wreath rings, 2 of them actually, and I got 2 signposts that I wanted to paint over and write on. I do have some acrylic paint at home, but I found this chalkboard paint and thought it would add just a really nice, different texture to the wreath. So this is everything I got. I also got a wreath hanger for when all was said and done. And it really wasn't a bad price, including the ginger ale that I got for myself to drink while I was making. It turned out to be $18.24, so really not bad for all the materials I had considering. So I decided to get ready and set up shop on my living room floor with my box cutter and my tools and a trash bag. So I put on some Ink Master, some dumb TV, and got right to work. So this, I think, was a mistake. First thing I did was I measured to make sure that the bowl would fit, and it did. I got some Gorilla Glue later on, which would expand to make it even easier for that to be glued to the wreath. I then decided to cut the rope strings off of the signs. I debated whether or not keeping the rope, but there really wasn't much for me to work with there. And then I got to work on painting the signs. So painting the signs starting off like this, I think was actually a mistake. As you can see, I'm using a lot of paint covering these smaller pieces of materials that I'm working with. And I still have a lot more stuff to paint. That's going to take some time to dry. So I think it was a mistake to start with these, or at least get started with them in that position. I should have used another spot or had them in the corner. I went ahead and added 2 coats of this chalkboard paint to it after it had dried completely. So you can see me putting on the first coat now. I then moved on to the bowl. I was going to put that bowl in the middle of the wreath ring, as you can see, to make the Jack Skellington face. And right here is where you're going to see why it was a mistake to paint the signs first. As you can see, I really didn't have much room to cleanly paint the bowl, so I was kind of stuck a little bit there. I pulled out a paper towel just in case. That white paint that I used did not want to open, so I got some separate white paint, and I just kind of went to town for that first coat. I don't mind a little bit of texture. But I did try to make it as smooth as possible for Jack Skellington's face. 1 solid layer of white, making sure that you couldn't see anything through to the back, because I did leave a sticker on it. Got some on my wrist right there from holding it up. Took some of my ginger ale, and then decided to move on to the mesh. So like I said, my plan was to stick the face, that bowl, through the center of the ring, and I wasn't sure if that would mess up the mesh after I had wrapped it, so I had the dumb notion that maybe I should wrap first, at least that inner ring first, but it just, as you can see here, it just was not going to work, so I just decided to go ahead and wrap the entire wreath beforehand, which is going to be fine. So I'm glad I got 2 of the floral rings for that, but as you can see, they're not quite big enough to fit this wreath frame. So I took my box cutters and I initially cut the first one in half. As you can see, the curvature still wasn't quite fitting, so I knew I needed to cut them even smaller, into even smaller pieces. My goal was to have, if not the whole thing covered, to have a good amount of it covered, because I still wasn't sure where I wanted to place the flowers and the pumpkins. So yeah, I have these cheap box cutters that I had got from, I think, Walgreens. They did not work very well, so if you're gonna invest in some handy dandy crafting tools like this, then just go ahead and buy higher quality. All right, so you don't see me because for some reason I had forgotten I was filming and was placing the foam off camera onto the wreath. You might have noticed earlier I had pulled out some of this super glue, and that was a horrible, horrible decision. I thought I had plenty, first of all. My plan was to spread the super glue rather onto the foam and then stick it onto there's Ozzy, onto the wreath ring. But unfortunately, as you can see there, the super glue exploded all over my hand, so I wasted time spending a good 20 or 30 minutes trying to peel it off my entire hand. My hand was completely encased in this nasty super glue. So fortunately or unfortunately, that was my only container of super glue, so I had to go back and get back to the store and get some Gorilla Glue. So since I had no room, like I said, to work on the other parts of the wreath, I moved everything down. I decided to smooth out the Jack Skellington face bowl for a little bit while I was moving everything. Cleaned up some of my tools and crafting kits in my bag, and then got back to work on arranging this. So I did end up using some of the super glue, but like I said earlier, it really did not work very well. But I got a little impatient as well, so I decided to screw it and just get some tape to secure the foam. Yeah, so here I am just securing it with tape. I was kind of worried about it. I thought it might be a little too crinkly with the mesh, but as you'll see, it actually turned out pretty well. I didn't have to use tape for the whole thing. My initial plan was to just kind of use that to help secure the super glue, the foam I had super glued, but I had been running errands all day, did not feel like going to the dollar store again or out shopping again in this moment, so tape it was. I then went ahead and decided to start arranging the pumpkins and the roses. So of course, first thing I did was get rid of the tags. Tried to see if I could cut some more off or make them smaller. It really was not working. So I just rolled with what I have. I wasn't quite sure how I wanted to position the pumpkins and the roses together. Like I said, I tried to trim them to make them smaller, and I thought I could maybe arrange them around the wreath. But that when I realized what they weren't going to cut, it was they weren't cutting very easily. I decided to just kind of group them together into two separate little bouquets to put on either side of the wreath. And this was actually pretty difficult to stick them in to that foam. So if you have sharper tools than what I had, highly recommend you maybe making a sharper edge to the plastic on the flowers, if you possibly can, before sticking them into the foam, because once that sucker does not give at all. So yeah, you can see me struggling, and then rearranging was a little difficult. And of course, because of their length and it being in a circle, a lot of times it would poke through, the stems would poke through towards the center, which I did not want. So it did take a little bit of finagling and rearranging, but eventually I got it. I then decided to wrap the mesh around the wreath. Again, I started by just securing it with some tape. And like I said earlier, this really did not turn out that bad. But like I said, I ultimately did go and get some Gorilla Glue after I was done filming this. So yeah, I had cut off this portion earlier because I thought I was going to wrap just the inner part of the wreath for some reason, and that did not work out. I grabbed the whole roll of the remaining mesh, secured that bit down with tape, and just kind of started wrapping. I did try to make it as tight as possible. I was worried at this point that 2 rolls of the mesh would not be enough. As you can see, it was very see-through, and I wanted it to be very solid. So I was worried that the 2 rolls would not be enough to get the effect that I wanted. But in the end, it worked out. I'm gonna secure the tape at this point. Wanted to readjust the flowers as well to make sure that they were good to go, because they did move around, of course, when I was wrapping around them. I tried to cut again. I think this one I was successful in cutting. Yes, I was finally successful in cutting that off. It had already kind of broken off already at the store, so I went through and reattached it and stuck it in by itself. Again, if you plan on doing this, it is easier to just cut them off and reattach and stick them in for both your design purposes and just for ease. Right, so as I said, I went through with the second roll of mesh. I just wanted to make sure everything was smooth, so that was why I tried a few times going around the flowers just to make sure there were no lumps or bumps in my wrapping. And with that second roll finished, I secured it temporarily with tape before I went out and got some Gorilla Glue. I checked on my signs. There was some like flakiness that had dried as well around the signs where I had kind of painted onto the trash bag. And this is what my wreath looked like after the first day. Overall, I was pretty happy with it. It wasn't exactly what I had envisioned, but I also could not complain. Alright, so the next day, after everything had dried, I again put on some crappy TV show to watch in the background. As you can see, I had gone over the end of the mesh with some Gorilla Glue, and then tried to secure it again with some tape, which was a little bit messy, but it's the back of the wreath, so it was fine. I then took a dry sponge brush and scraped off some of that excess shaggy kind of chalkboard paint that had dried over. It was then time to paint the Jack Skellington face, so I went and got my iPad to get a good reference. I know what Jack Skellington looks like, but I still wanted to make sure I had a good reference to paint his face. So after finding one that I was pretty happy with, I got to work with my black paint and a tiny brush. Now this is white on black, of course, which is always a little nerve-wracking. So I started with a slight, very light amount of black paint to kind of more or less trace what I was doing. So I began by tracing out the mouth for the smile, and then went through and slowly drew in the eyes. And of course his little nose. Of course the eyes were easier to paint on than a straight lines like the smile or the stitching in his smile, or the nose. You can, of course, and I did actually, and you'll see later, I did go back and correct some of my mistakes after everything had dried. Just painted over the black with some more white paint. But with things around the mouth, it was a little too close together, and my brushes weren't quite so delicate, and my hand position or my hands are not so steady as to me being comfortable and confident to fix those. So ultimately I was pleased with this painting of Jack and his face, but the mouth could have been a lot cleaner. So I then went on to write my script for the signs. I wanted it to look somewhat similar to the Nightmare Before Christmas font. It wasn't going to look exact. I'm not that great at script writing. And again, my hand movement when I'm painting is not so steady that I can do that super cleanly, but I did try. I really wanted to write, "Wouldn't you like to see something strange?" on my door. You know, just to quote the first song from the movie, "This is Halloween." And of course, not every letter of the alphabet is included in the Nightmare Before Christmas title, so I didn't quite have a reference for every single letter I wanted to use, or was going to use. So I just kind of improvised and went as close as I possibly could. And after I had traced on the font with a pencil first and then painted over it again with white paint, but I probably could have also used yellow. I went to see how Jack looked after securing it to my wreath. Again, I'm really happy I used Gorilla Glue for that. It expanded. So this is what the wreath looks like as the finished product. Overall, I think it's pretty cute. I'm pretty pleased with it, and I could just add some holly to it for Christmas. Hope you enjoyed this video. Bye, guys.